you very much. Tonight we are going recording. Okay. Now we're recording. Okay. So tonight we're talking about a fascinating topic. This one is still a little bit futuristic. That is the topic of self-driving cars. Self-driving cars, and there are a number of different issues that this raises. Maybe we can hand out the source sheets. Okay, because there are a few different places we can go with this discussion, and I want to mention a couple of different ideas. Where I'm not going to be, what I won't be discussing, there are many articles that have been written, many books that have come out on this as well. One of the questions people talk about is in terms of liability, insurance. Right? Who is responsible if a self-driving car is involved in an accident? It's not the driver, because you weren't driving. Is it the owner of the car? Is it the programmer who programmed the car, etc.? I'm not going to be talking about that, but a number of other fascinating questions come up. Have a look at your source sheets. Everyone has one by now. Source number one, very interesting article which came out. This was published in Makor Rishon in March 2020, and he gives us a scenario for the future. The truth is that there are a lot of questions in terms of Shabbat, in terms of technologies, which we won't be talking about all of them in particulars tonight. But there are a lot of underlying principles which are going to be common to a lot of these technologies, and the questions that the cars raise is going to come up in those areas as well. So listen to this. Source number one, called it A Taste of the Future. He says, "Maaseh she'yeh, kach yihiyeh." And this is a story which will happen. This has not happened yet, but this is sometime in the future. He says, "Be'od 15 shana, omedet likanes Shabbat parashat Vayechi." I assume the week that this appeared in the newspaper was Parashat Vayechi. There's nothing particular about that parasha, but this could be any bunch. And he says like this: "Tochnit hasiur ha'ishit sheli yodat kamovan shani shomer Shabbat." Right, the digital assistant, smart home, smart assistant, whatever it is, which is tracking your every move and tracking your every action and tracking your every thought. Therefore, knows that you keep Shabbat. Through different things, through the digital footprint, through the patterns of behavior, it tells that. It knows when I turn things on and turn things off, and when I'm operating different appliances, and by the fact that I don't operate them on Shabbat, if no other, then it knows that I keep Shabbat. וגם יודעת את זמני התפילה בבית הכנסת, אשר מגיעים אליי בדואר אלקטרוני, אני טיפוס מיושן. A little bit of humor. He said it knows the times of the times of davening from my emails. I think by this stage these systems will be able to work out the times of davening better than you can. But in any event, בלוח הופיעה הזמנה לבר מצווה של אחייני בשכונה שבקצה העיר. And the email which came in featured an invitation to a bar mitzvah on the other side of town for my nephew. לכן, התוכנה מזמנה עבורי רכב אוטונומי מותאם לשבת. Therefore, what should the program do? It's going to order a robot taxi, a self-driving car, right, which will come. Again, I didn't do anything here. This is all automatic, which will come, and it's before Shabbat. It's been ordered. The system knows how to make itself kosher for Shabbat, so it's turned off all the lights on the doors and it's turned off all the sensors. Obviously, there will be a sign, a flashing lights across the top of the car saying this is a car which is Shomer Shabbat with Yeshua Machon Somet, or whichever Machon will be in those days. Therefore, right, if the weather's like this, no problem, I can go out all the way to this bar mitzvah. And here is a car which is waiting for me on Shabbat morning. Will this be permitted? Will I be allowed to go in such a car? There's no driver, there's nobody doing anything. Will I be allowed to use them on Shabbat? How many people here think the answer is yes? Interesting. How many people think the answer is no? You could go into plans. Maybe. Okay, so this is one example. So we're going to come back to this a little bit later on in the show. This is one of the questions. If you have a car which is fully automated, fully automatic, nobody is pressing any buttons, nobody's ordering anything, you're not even operating through a sensor, would you be able to use them on Shabbat? And as I said, before we get to the question of the cars, smart homes, all sorts of automation technology, all sorts of things which are happening. Can we use them? Can we not use them? Why? This is one of the big questions that is coming.
Are we not already doing that today?
What?
Our heating system is based on thermostats, all sorts of other things.
So there are many things where you could go and where you could look, right? And the question is this just the same? Is this just another thermostat, or is this something else? And therefore, is it going to be permitted or not? That's one of the big questions that comes up. That's what everybody enjoys talking about with self-drive. Yeah.
I think it's one of the important points.
Okay.
And also, it won't be my side because everybody will be doing it. So, perhaps all the people invited to the seminar, they all arrive in North American cars.
Okay, so you've jumped forward to Marit Ayin. Marit Ayin is only a consideration if I say that it's permitted until that point.
Yeah.
But maybe before we get to Marit Ayin, maybe there's a problem. And Henry just raised the point. He says if the car is coming specifically for you and it's doing it for you, maybe not. Okay, so what if we have automatic shuttles that are going for everybody? So we'll come back to that. That's one question, one fascinating point of discussion. There is another one before we get to that, which just to show you some of the questions that poskim need to deal with and ethicists are dealing with. The question everybody loves to talk about when we talk about driverless cars is the trolley problem. Okay, which is this is a little bit different. This has not got anything to do with Halachic Shabbat. It's got to do with ethics. This has got to do, in fact, with the ethics of life and death. And that goes something like this. Have a look at source number 2. So this is this was published in Scientific American, and we're going back a number of years. It says the following scenario: a self-driving car carrying a family of 4 on a rural two-lane highway spots a bouncing ball ahead. As the vehicle approaches, a child runs out to retrieve the ball. Should the car risk its passengers' lives by swerving to the side, where the edge of the road meets a steep cliff, or should the car continue on its path, ensuring passenger safety at the child's expense? Okay, these are the questions which the programmers right now, writing the algorithms, are facing, have to decide. Obviously, real-world scenarios are going to be much more complex than this, but the principles need to be put in. Just in terms of this question, how many people, who thinks number one, who thinks the car should swerve, saving the child and killing the passengers? Not necessarily. Okay, but the question, this is the scenario. Either it's going to swerve and kill the passengers, or it's not going to swerve and it's going to kill the child.
Isn't there a question? Yeah.
So there is a question. So you're right. There is a question for anybody driving a car. The difference is, here we're talking about, meaning if the scenario comes up and if a person is stuck, we're going to see that's where we have to, if we want to know how to program it, we'd ask, what would a person in that situation have to do? But here, it's we're not waiting for the scenario to happen. It's the program has to be written. The algorithm has to decide what it's going to do.
Isn't there an override capacity with the car, right?
There may be, there may not be. It depends what kind of level, how we're talking. So okay, so these are all very interesting questions. Let's see the next the next part of this article, because there's something very interesting in terms of. We didn't finish voting. We'll have other questions to vote on soon. But it says like this. It says most participants in the science report indicate that they believe vehicles should be programmed to crash into something rather than run over pedestrians, even if that meant killing the vehicle's passengers. Listen to this. The algorithms that control autonomous vehicles will need to embed moral principles guiding their decisions in situations of unavoidable harm. That's what people said when they were asked the question theoretically. Now, the next question was, would you still say the same thing if that's the car that you were driving and you're the one? Would you buy a car that's going to kill you? Not so simple. Yeah, many of the same study participants balked at the idea of buying such a vehicle, preferring to ride in a driverless car that prioritizes their own safety over that of pedestrians. The researchers concluded that if lawmakers were to prioritize pedestrians over passengers when regulating self-driving vehicles, people would be less likely to buy those vehicles. So we have what we're starting to see, just the complexity of all these issues, meaning that you could have a question in terms of, in the given situation, what is the decision? What should it be? But then, if we're going to say that this is the way, this is what most people think, morally, ethically, is the correct thing, but that would stop them from buying these cars. And that would slow down the market, and that would stop us from stop these cars from being developed and coming into the market. That means, all in all, you have a more dangerous situation out there on the road. Having these kind of cars, again, these situations are going to be extremely unlikely. They're going to be extremely rare. That will happen at some point. There have been accidents with self-driving cars, but if you compare it to the situation on the roads today, the roads in this country now, in this city, I think everybody's seen it. But World Health Organization report from 2018, just to give a sense of the numbers. Annually, how many deaths from traffic accidents in the world? Anybody want to guess? Take a step in the dark.
10 million. No.
You're really pessimistic. Okay, but it's not that bad, but 1.25 million deaths a year, which is, these numbers are astronomical. 20 million injuries a year from traffic accidents, and they say that up to 94% of accidents are caused by human error. So you could basically eliminate nearly all of those with these autonomous vehicles. The question comes up, if you have the autonomous vehicles and they are safer, empirically safer, are you then, there may be a stage where you'll have human drivers and autonomous drivers and autonomous vehicles at the same time. Would you be allowed to drive a car at that point? If it's going to be more dangerous, are you allowed to endanger yourself in that way? So these are some of the questions. But the point is, it's important to make that point, because everybody talks about, we're talking about ethics, we're talking about these fascinating questions. We'll get into a little bit more detail in a moment. These are going to be the exception, meaning the rule is, and these things are only going to come into play and come into the market when they are that much safer. And 99% of the time, these scenarios will not happen. But for that 1% when it will happen, we need to know what to do. We need to know what are the principles that are guiding it. And so the technology is, for a number of years, people have been talking about this. People have been predicting that these are going to come into the market. I think there've probably been predictions that by now we'd all be in self-driving cars. We know that's not quite the case, not yet. But it's probably a question of when, rather than a question of if. Although things do, there are obstacles in the way. I saw source number 3 is an article which I saw today. This was published today by Reuters, talking about how many of the companies are taking a lot longer than they thought. You can see it says earlier promises that were made by robo-taxi companies of operating fleets of vehicles by the early 2020s, i.e. now, have fallen well short. We're not quite there yet. The problem is that making robot cars that can drive more safely than people is immensely tough. This is because AV, autonomous vehicle systems, still lack humans' ability to predict and assess risks quickly, especially when encountering unexpected incidents. So I thought that was very interesting as well. It shows us that human beings, for now, still have some advantages over the machines. Will that still be the case 50 years' time, 100 years' time? I don't know. But this is going to be relevant when in a couple of weeks we talk about artificial intelligence in general, in terms of replacing us, replacing different things that we do, and some of the ethical and halachic implications of that. Right? Artificial intelligence replace your rabbi. They should. We'll talk about that. So that is a little bit of the introduction, a little bit of the background of self-driving cars, what we're talking about. So let's look at 2 of the questions. Again, one which is a more universal question, but certainly has halachic implications in terms of these ethical dilemmas, in terms of the principles, how the car should be programmed. And then we'll go and look a little bit at the question of using these cars on the permissibility or not on Shabbat. Okay, so one of the things which is fascinating about this discussion and about many of the discussions we've been having, and I know I keep going back to this point, but you'll indulge me, is that we have things which were, until not very long ago, completely theoretical or completely impossible, fantastic in the literal sense of the word. And now with modern technology, with these discoveries that are being made, these inventions that are being made, these technologies that are developed, things which seemed impossible are now very, very real and are very, very practical. We spoke about it in the last couple of weeks, in the sense of, when we spoke about the meat, we saw stories in the Gemara and Agadah which seemed, how could this ever have any practical ramifications? And yet you see something similar that is taking place now. So over here, what we have is something which is, there is a classic philosophical problem, which is quite an extreme case. And again, it's a theoretical discussion, which people have been talking about for decades, if not more. And now you find that it is halacha l'maaseh, that the programmers of these vehicles, of these algorithms, need to decide what would you do in a given situation. What I'm talking about is the trolley problem. Many people here have heard of this. This is a classic ethical dilemma, which was first, in this version of it, was coined more or less by a professor called Philip Mafut, who was in Oxford University, I believe. And the problem goes as follows, more or less. Right, we're still on page 1. Number 4 at the bottom of the page, we have a diagram. This is the trolley problem. So you have a car, a train, a tram, whatever you want it is, that is hurtling down a track. And it is going along the track, as you can see, it's going straight, right to the right. And there are 5 people. In the old days, they used to say the 5 people are tied to the track. Now I say the 5 people are just looking at their phones. They're not going to move. They're there. They have no, they're completely oblivious to the fact that this trolley is coming down at high speed. And if nothing is done, it's going to kill them. All 5 are going to get knocked over. No, we're taking all the variables out of the equation. And it's going to kill all 5 people. Now, you can't stop the trolley, you can't brake, you can't warn the people, you can't move them. All of that is not part of the equation. What you can do, however, is there is another track. And as you can see on the other track, there is just one person tied to that track. Why all these people tied to train tracks, I don't know. But on the other track, there is one person. Now, you are the person in the middle, right, standing there next to the lever. And what you can do is you can pull the lever and you'll divert the trolley. If you leave it, if you don't do anything, this trolley is going down, hurtling down the track, it's killing 5 people. If you pull the lever, you will divert the trolley, and those 5 people will be saved, but the other person, we'll call it Reuven, on the other track is going to be killed. So do nothing and 5 people die, or pull the lever and 1 person dies. Who pulls the lever? Wow.
Who pulls the lever?
Huh?
Who pulls the lever?
Yeah. No, that was a question. Meaning how many of you would pull the lever to save the 5 people?
This question comes up in both ever
Comes up in many contexts. Okay, so we have this is very interesting. It's a very atypical crowd. Just to see people on Zoom. Mark, you can count. How many people you have, by the way, on the side by the chat? You have a button that says raise hand, so you can use that button rather than actually raising your hand, and it will be very easy for us to count.
I need to stop the share. We've got 30 people here, by the way.
With 30 people, okay, we'll see how many of them are awake. If you of the 30 people on Zoom, would you pull the lever? If you would pull the lever to save the 5 people,
Oops.
raise your hand.
Oops. What am I doing here? I can't, hold on a second. I lost it all now.
You may see the thing on.
Okay, it's back. Chat. Take that on.
You can raise your hand or you can write in the chat, say yes,
Here's
whatever it is.
view.
Info's place.
Huh?
Okay, I got a lot of people. I can see hand people. Oh yeah, the majority of people. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Another question. Yeah, go on. That's God. But let's say we're killing. That's right. That's right.
So this is precisely our question, right? We could phrase it in many different ways. And essentially what I'm asking you is sorry? Yeah. Utilitarian, correct. So I could phrase it, I could say, would you pull the lever to kill the 1? Or I could say, would you pull the lever to save the 5? Or would you do nothing to kill the 5? Or would you do nothing to save the 1? I can phrase it however you want. But essentially that's our question. Question is, if you pull the lever, 1 person will die and 5 people won't. If you don't pull the lever, 1 person will not die, but 5 people will. So on Zoom, we have the majority said they would pull the lever?
No, apparently not. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 out of 32. 9 out of 32 positions.
Okay, so the truth is that normally most people say that they would pull the lever, which is why so it's very, very interesting. Maybe you've heard this before, maybe you have preconceived notions as to how to, or you just think differently. But most people say they would, if you can save 5 people, right? In absolute terms, you want less people to die and more people not to die. What a number of people here have said is that, wait a minute, anything that you do, if you come along and pull the lever, you are killing, you're doing a maaseh biyadayim, you're actively killing. So we might say, hang on a minute. And if you don't do anything, you are actively standing by. We know we have a mitzvah that says, well, don't stand by. And then you have the possibility perhaps to save them. Okay, so this is the question, and this is a question which has been debated by ethicists for centuries in various different forms. Somebody mentioned, do we say there are the two extreme schools of thought on this? The utilitarians on the one hand, who say everything goes by the absolute numbers. The more people who can be saved, the better in absolute terms, the less people to die. That is the approach to take. And then you have the deontologists on the other hand who say, we don't go by numbers, we go by principles. You don't act in order to kill, right? And that is the question. So this question, which seems quite theoretical, but again, you get to these scenarios of the self-driving cars. You have to turn over the page. You might have a situation where a car is driving down a tunnel and you have a number of pedestrians, right? The car's going to keep going and it's going to kill all those pedestrians, or it could swerve and save those pedestrians, but it's going to kill the people inside. Various different forms of this. Do we take one of these extreme positions on the trolley problem? What does Halacha have to say? So the first thing, and I think everybody in this room sort of felt it intuitively, but that certainly in its extreme view, Judaism is not utilitarian. Okay, we're not going to say that we go by just the number of lives, because every single life is of infinite value. And therefore, how do you measure, infinity of one set versus infinity? I don't know if there's any mathematicians here. There are different sets of infinity, but let's not get into that. The point is, you have infinity on the one hand in one life, you have infinity in 5 lives. How do you measure which is which? And so many of you said, what's the best thing to do? You're doing anything by acting, you're responsible for killing, as opposed to Sheva al Taseh Adif. In good company, that is what the Tzitz Eliezer says on this question. Tzitz Eliezer says, in such a case, Sheva al Taseh Adif, any action which you're going to take, any Maaseh B'yadayim, you're going to be responsible for killing, and that is not something which we can allow. And we're talking about laws of life and death. Where do we see this? Where do we see a precedent for this? Have a look in top of page 2. You have the Rambam. This is the Rambam in Hilchot Yesodei Torah. It's based in Tosefta and Yerushalmi, but he says the following case. He says, "Im amru lahem uvdei kochavim tnu lanu echad mikem v'na'ogenu v'im lav na'arog kulchem." So you have a scenario where, unfortunately, these halachot have been written in blood throughout the generations. But you have a scenario where you have a group of the enemies are saying, "There's a group of you under siege. Give us one person. Let's sacrifice one, and we'll kill him to save the rest. But if not, you'll all die." Right? You see the similarity between this and the trolley problem. Says the Rambam, "Yargu kulam v'al yimsur lahem nefesh echat miYisrael." They all have to die. You cannot choose. You cannot take that person and give him over for death. He continues. There are certain exceptions to this. It says, "Im yechadu lahem v'amru tnu lanu ploni onarog et kulchem." Right? In a scenario where they say, not just give us one of you, but give us him, Reuven, right? Or we'll kill everybody. Then he says, well, then it depends. There are certain situations, if this person was already mechuyav mitah, and there's discussion as to exactly what it means here, mechuyav mitah, does that mean mechuyav mitah from the Torah, or mechuyav mitah nelos? But that may be an exception where you could give over that person. However, the standard, the default position is no. We don't, even though one person give over one life to save the rest, we wouldn't do that. Yeah.
I would assume that's not the case. If they say, give us Ruvain, or we're going to kill everybody, including Ruvain. Because Ruvain's out there someplace hiding. So we're going to find him and kill him anyway.
So you're saying, so
you turn over Ruvain, because he's going to die either way.
No, either way, yeah, everybody's going to die.
If Ruvain is going to die either way, why would you have more people die?
Okay, so that relates to the question of what does it mean over here? Is mechuyav mitah? Where mechuyav mitah? It could be, yeah. But again, for the default position, you see, is that we say no, we don't, and that's why the Tzitz Eliezer came along and he says we can't do a maaseh b'yadayim to kill somebody. The Chazon Ish has a very, very interesting perspective on this. The Chazon Ish over here in source number 5. Now it's you'll hear the words of the Chazon Ish and will remind you very much of the trolley problem. It said that he was actually referring to an actual case which took place with a truck driver who was the brakes failed, and this is the scenario that he was in. He could go straight or he could swerve, and in terms of keep going straight and more people would be hit, or he could swerve and less people would be hit. It was after Maaseh the person came to ask the Chazon Ish if he had acted correctly or not. but it's related to that question. So this is what he says, and he comes up with a scenario which is essentially ours. He says, "Yesh la'ayen be'echad ro'eh chetz holech la'arog anashim rabim." You see an arrow, you see a missile which is going to kill a number of people. V'yachol la'toto letzad acher v'yarog rak echad shebatzad acher. All that you can do is you can divert the missile. You can't stop it, but you can divert it to one side, and then it's going to kill one person who's there. And the elu shebasad zeh yitzor, and the ones who are here will be saved. V'im lo yaseh klum, but if you do nothing, yehagu rabim, then more people will be killed. V'ayachaz yishayah b'chaim, and the one standing on the side will be alive. But again, it's the same question, the same scenario. Says the Chazon Ish. Now he has a chiddush. He says, you would have said, if I hadn't said anything else, just like you've seen in the Rambam and you've seen in the Tosefta and what we've said until now, that it's exactly the same case where you can't give one over to be killed. However, he says, maybe it's different. Why is it different? He says, over there, it is an act of cruelty. We'll try and understand this. It's not so easy to understand this distinction, but he says over there in that case where the enemies are saying, give us one person, hand him over for death, that is certainly an act of cruelty to hand the person over to be killed. He says, how do we look at this act? Do we look at this as a kind act? Do we look at this as an act of cruelty? We look at it as an act of cruelty. ultimately there is a benefit that is going to come out of it, of saving the other people. But what do you have to do in order to get there? He says, I would look at this as intrinsically you're doing something cruel, and it comes out of it, right, directly, indirectly, the saving everybody else. And the fact that other people have been saved is because you have sacrificed somebody else. However, he says the Chazon Ish, when you come and you divert this arrow, you divert the missile, it's not the same. That action is not right. If you're pushing somebody in front of it to kill him, that would be perhaps similar to that case. But yeah, he says the fact you're diverting it, you're swerving away, that action is a pula of hatzalah. That is an act of saving. That is an act of kindness. He says it's almost coincidental, the fact that somebody else is there. Meaning in the first case, what we saw in the Rambam, right? There's no question. It is intrinsic. You're saying, I'm not putting this person out to be free. I'm putting this person out there to be killed. Right? And it's almost coincidental that once he is killed, everybody else is saved. Over here, he says it's the reverse. This I would not define, says the Chazon Ish, as an act of cruelty. I define it as an act of kindness. If there was nobody there standing on the other way, would I still divert the missile? Of course I would. That's what I'm trying to do. It happens to be somebody else there. That's very unfortunate. And but he says therefore that is different. And therefore he says maybe when we look at the nature of the act, that this is not an act of giving somebody over to death. This is an act of saving somebody. There's room to distinguish, and there's room to say that it could be. At the end of the day, he still believes it in Shiur. He's not completely convinced by it, that we can say, but it gives an opening, it gives a better for discussion. Somebody have a question? No? Okay. So that is the Chazon Ish. That is, as I said, the Tzitz Eliezer says absolutely not. You can't do that. So what happens now when we take this theoretical problem and we plug it in to the algorithm? Right? Would we therefore have to say that you leave the car doing what it's doing, going where it's going, and it's going to kill more people rather than swerving in order to save those people? Because that is maybe an action, and that is right. So if we take the view of the Tzitz Eliezer, would seem we'd have to say that. If we accept the Chazon Ish, maybe there's room to distinguish, and maybe there's room to differentiate over here. That as much as we said, it's very nice to go back and look at this trolley problem and look at these classic ethical questions, the way they're posed, but maybe there are differences between that case and the case of the car and the case of the program. How so? 3 possibilities, and I'm sure there's more, but just 3 that I'll mention. Number 1 is, Right, here I'll ask the question at the beginning of the shiur. Why is this related to the person programming the car? Why is this not related to anybody driving? So somebody who's driving and then finds themselves in that position at that time, and you have to take that decision. Whatever you're doing right now, you're choosing either to keep going and kill those people or to move aside and kill somebody else. But if we're talking not at the time of the driver, we're talking, this could be months, this could be years, this could be decades, centuries before this actually happened. When the programmer is writing that algorithm, what are you doing? I'm not writing an algorithm to say, how do I look at it? I'm not writing it to say, kill X or kill Y. I'm saying, act in such a way that is going to cause the least amount of damage. Act in such a way that is going to cause the least amount of deaths. In other words, I'm programming it now in a way to save lives. And that certainly is maybe an extension of what the Chazon Ish is saying, maybe further. We could say more than that. We could say, if you know a little bit about programming, about code, the way it works, is it really accurate to say that, is there such a concept of Sheva al Taseh? Meaning at every moment, the machine, the car is making a decision in terms of what it's going to do next. And every moment it's acting on a command, right? So it could be that if there is a decision to be made anyway, then that's always considered a kum va'aseh. And how would it be? These are suggestions which come, not from me, but which come from some of the programmers at Mobileye, who had a discussion about this very interesting article, which I'll reference in a moment. I'll give it to you one moment. And a third way of looking at this might be to say that there is a difference between an individual level, individual decision has to be made, versus if you're talking about on a societal level, no matter how these cars are going to be programmed, we said at the beginning, then that would maybe need to be done in such a way that causes the least loss of life in order to ultimately, create what's going to be the best for society. Yeah.
A couple of things.
Sure.
The first one is Tesla is suffering this right now. They had driverless vehicle, autonomous vehicles involved in accidents that they shouldn't have been. That's one. The second thing is in 1942, Isaac Asimov wrote 3 laws for robotics. Okay, autonomous vehicles are robotic vehicles, and the first law of robotics is do not harm humans. Okay, and there are 2 more, but the first one is humans can't be hurt. And the third comment is we keep, you've said it, you talk to Mobileye people, the Tesla people. Coding is not an easy thing to do, number one. It's done in a group. It involves groupthink, it involves financial issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But part of that process, I'll use my experience with medical devices that have computers in which are effectively robots. There's a process that the computer people or the people designing the device have to look at device failure mode effects. Put one, you write one down, and how are you going to, if it's an issue, how are you going to solve the issue and when you improve this? So that even before you put the first pencil to paper for coding, you need to have this kind of philosophical discussion and make the engineers who are not fundamentally philosophers by any stretch, who would kind of wonder what the trolley thing has to do, but if the discussion is directed properly, all of a sudden they're going to say, oh, maybe I need to have 2 microsecond response times in my algorithms.
Right.
And the finance guy knows how much additional cost. So it becomes a huge, huge issue.
Okay.
And if these questions don't get put in the discussion in the very beginning, the algorithm development or the device development, Tesla, the guys must bought the company from. They sat down, they were going to make an electric vehicle. Autonomy may or may not have been in their basket when they started it, but now it's become that.
Okay.
And they have issues.
Significant
issues.
That's exactly what we're talking about. Thank you for those comments. I mean, the truth is, a lot of this information, a lot of these sources and these discussions, come from there's a guy called Moise Navon. People here may know him, may have heard of him. He is a rabbi. He was one of the programmers at Mobileye. done a lot of work in this in this area, and he's exactly sitting and working on these problems and with his team. And this is the point that we're making, that these ethical dilemmas are being raised now and they have to be addressed now, right? In one way or another. Just have a look at source number 6 for a moment, because this is an important caveat with all of this that we have to talk about. Every time people talk about the ethics of autonomous vehicles, you get the sense that every other day there's going to be a trolley problem happening and there's going to be accidents all over the place. That is not what we're foreseeing. He says, though these ethical dilemmas are very real, the actual occurrence of them will be very unlikely. So while the discussion is indispensable, since autonomous vehicles will have to be programmed to account for them, in reality, the algorithms will rarely be executed. The point cannot be emphasized enough, because the public needs to realize that autonomous vehicles are being developed to save lives, not to endanger them. Indeed, the sooner autonomous vehicles are on the road, human drivers removed therefrom, we'll identify with that, the sooner we can start saving literally millions of lives. Okay, and that's exactly the point. And again, the point that I want to take out of this relates to the point that you made, which is, we've given a very simplified picture of what these dilemmas are. Real world scenarios are going to be much more complex. How often this particular scenario will play out is probably never. It's probably very unlikely. But there are questions here. There are principles guiding it. At the end of the day, all of these autonomous vehicles and all of these AI systems have got ethical principles that are governing them. Who's deciding what those principles are? Do we know what those principles are? Do we know? You're buying a car. You're literally putting your lives in the hands of something which does it work according to your value systems? According to whose value system? Who determines that? And this is a question which is going to come up again in 2 weeks' time when we talk about artificial intelligence in a much broader sense, right? I don't know how many people have experimented a little with ChatGPT and asked questions and things. Okay, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you have to come back in 2 weeks' time. We'll talk about it some more. But essentially, it's a very, very sophisticated. There's many sermons that have been written on. Not mine. But there are the question is, can you ask it to it's a language model. It's a piece of artificial intelligence. You can go onto it on the internet. You can ask it questions. It will write them back. You can ask it to do your homework. And this is another question that's come up, by the way. A lot, teachers. There was a case in one of the universities in America. 2 students were actually found that their entire essay, which is written on ChatGPT, disciplinary procedures, etc. And it's going to change the way that we do homework. It's going to change the way that we think about a lot of things. But you could go in. You could ask it Halachic questions. And it's going to give you answers. You could ask it value-based questions. It's going to give you answers, but based on whose values? Do we know? It may get to the stage, it's already happened in some models, whereby it can give you an answer, but it can't tell you why that's the answer. It can't tell you how it got there. Is that something that we can rely on? Okay, so that's something which comes out of this discussion as well. And I think it's very, very important that we need to be aware of it. It's going to affect all of our lives. And this is something which the secular ethicists are looking at. It's something that poskim have to look at as well. Let's move on to the second question now, regarding Shabbat. Right, this is what you all want to know. Can we use our autonomous car on Shabbat? So again, first of all, somebody mentioned before questions about override switches and things like that. So if we're talking about an autonomous car, I think it needs to be clear that if we're even raising the question about Shabbat, we're talking about where things are fully automated. They talk today about 5 levels, or at least 6 levels of automation, going from level 0 all the way up to level 5. So, for example, things like cruise control, etc., where the car has certain systems which work automatically, but you're still driving. The human is very much in control. That would be level 1. Right? Level 3, for example, where they say where the driver can safely turn their attention away. You don't have this much. Can safely turn their attention away from the driving tasks, some sort of autopilot, but the vehicle will handle situations that call for an immediate response, like emergency braking, but the driver must still be prepared to intervene in some limited time specified by the manufacturer when called upon the vehicle to do so. Right? And so eventually you get to level 5, which they call steering wheel optional. No human intervention is required at all. An example would be a robotic taxi. So the question we're asking, could you use a robotic taxi on Shabbat? Okay, so there's really a debate as to whether we should even be debating this question. The few years ago, there was an article written in Hamayan, which is one of the Torah journals. It was actually written by Rabbi Eitan Kupietsky. His father was one of the Gabayim here in Armenia. He discussed a number of the halachot, of autonomous vehicles, just sort of giving an overview, and he got a response, a very scathing response from Yaakov Ariel, who said, "I can't believe we're even discussing this. You can't discuss it. Obviously, you can't use an autonomous vehicle on Shabbat, and it's a mistake for the Rabbanim to be opening this petak and talking about it." Of course, a few editions later, he issued a whole discussion, so he decided to talk about it. But so the question is, what would be the issues? Where would we look? What are the precedents maybe that we have for these kind of things? So there's a very important principle which is really going to govern this discussion. Have a look at the Rambam in source number 7. The Rambam in source number 7 is the Rambam in Halachic Shabbat, where he talks about the halachot of muktzeh. And he talks about why we have muktzeh. A number of reasons which are given why Chachamim forbade us from moving muktzeh. One of the things which is very well known is that you have, for example, a kli shemach trolley, which is an item which you might come to do something prohibited on Shabbat. So Chazal said, instead, don't even pick it up so that you won't come to do the melacha. That is one explanation, as part of the explanation for muktzeh. Says the Rambam in source number 7. He says, "Asru chachamim letartel miktzat dvarim b'Shabbat kederach she'oseh b'chol." He says, Chachamim said that there are certain things which you cannot carry on Shabbat the way that you would carry them on the weekday. Where does this prohibition come from? Amru, ma'im hiziran neviim v'tzivu shelo yeh elochecha b'Shabbat kilocha b'chol v'lo sichat haShabbat kesichat hachol. Right? We've learned that from the neviim that you cannot walk the same way on Shabbat that you walk during the week. You cannot talk the same way on Shabbat that you talk during the week. Right? And we have many different examples, many applications of this. He says, the same way, the things that we carry, things that we move around, actions that we're engaged in on Shabbat cannot be the same as those on a weekday. This is the point. And there are different precautions that we have given to us by the Nevi'im, given to us by the Rabbanim, in order that Shabbat should be different, that Shabbat should not turn into Yom Chol. It could be a person is just taking all their things and moving them from one area to another in their house, doing what they normally do, but it's not Shabbat. He says, there are those people who don't work, don't have a trade, don't just sit batel all day. He says, and if it was that you could just do all the things, again, we're talking about things which don't involve a melacha in the first place. But if you could do all those things on Shabbat the same way that you do during the week, you're going to end up in a situation where it's not Shabbat, where you can't tell the difference between Shabbat and a weekday. This is the Rambam. This is his explanation for muktzeh. The Ramban has a very similar discussion. We've mentioned it a number of times in this year, the forums, where the Ramban says that a person could theoretically be in a situation where they've not transgressed a single one of the 39 melachot of Shabbat, but they haven't had Shabbat. They've gone and they've opened up their store and they've brought all their goods and they're selling and credit and lifting things up and transferring and weighing and all sorts of things. And he paints this whole picture of a day which is just like an ordinary weekday, but you haven't written, you haven't done any melacha. Nonetheless, says the Ramban that when the Torah told us that it has to be a Shabbaton, that means that there is a certain Sivyon of Shabbat, there is a certain character of Shabbat that is transgressed. And this is a deoraita commandment. Is that if a person doesn't do a single melacha, I can't point to one action that you did to say that is a melacha, but I can point to the overall action of what you did or the way your Shabbat looked, and I can say this is not Shabbat from the Torah.
But you got two different scenarios. One scenario is I leave my television on or on a timer or whatever, and it kind of detracts from Shabbat because you're involved in other things. On the other side, you could have a robot that clears up the table for you. So it's helping you enjoy Shabbat. So those are two scenarios with the same ramifications, but one is to enhance Shabbat, one is to detract from it.
Right. So exactly. So the question is, how do we know? How do we define? How do we determine what is enhancing, what is detracting, what is going to be? So it's helpful to look at some of the precedents that we have. at some of the places where these questions have come up, different things, different scenarios, which don't necessarily transgress any malacha themselves, but you'll see that some were accepted and some were not. And Rabbi Ariel in his article, I brought some of the sections here. I haven't brought everything, but he discusses, for example, he talks about the concept of a microphone. Right, many years ago, Shul Israeli gave a hectare to use a Shabbat microphone. Okay? How many people here have been in an Orthodox shul where they have used a microphone on Shabbat? No.
So that's supposed to be a kosher microphone.
Okay, but it's very rare. Meaning, in most places, most communities, most people have probably never heard of it. It's not something which there's a sense of call it Shamilta, call it Zilut of the Shabbat. There's a sense that this is something which you ask the vast majority of the poskim. We don't use microphones on Shabbat. There's not. I'm not talking now about medical emergencies and those kind of scenarios. And another example he brings is the question of bicycles on Shabbat. Right? If a person wants to ride a bicycle, what malacha have they transgressed? Because any malacha, no malacha in the Torah of the Lamentet of riding bicycles. The Ben Ish Chai famously said that it would be permitted to ride a bicycle on Shabbat, but nobody else accepted it. None of the other poskim accepted it. It was seen as something which is against the character of Shabbat. On the other hand, we have certain activities which have been accepted. For example, Shabbat. You think about a Shabbat elevator. Right? We have one that's very short. Right, Shabbat elevators, and this is Maasim Shebachol Yom. There may be certain communities and certain individuals that are stringent not to use them, but this is something which is by and large has taken hold, and with the blessing of the majority of the poskim. So you might say, what's the difference if you have a Shabbat elevator that goes up and down versus if you have a Shabbat car which goes one goes vertically, one goes horizontally? What's the difference? So again, first of all, we have to say there is an Isur Tchumin on Shabbat. There's a certain distance in which you can go. If the car is going to be pre-programmed to take you out of the Tchum, that would be a problem that's already a formalistic problem. Yeah, we're talking about even if there was no formalistic problem per se, what would it be? So Ariel says, here's the difference between this and elevator. Source number 8. He says, "Im yishal hashomer, lichora ma ha'hevdel ben maalit Shabbat bebatim hagvoim levein mechonit autonomit." Right after he says, I'm telling you that there's no way you can even discuss this. You'll say, well, we have Maalit Shabbat. What's the difference between that and a Mechonit Shabbat? Hatshuvai she'avdel kafur. He says, I'll tell you there's a double difference here. Be'echrech u'befarhesim. Right? Number one, be'echrech, in terms of the need, in terms of why we're doing this. Again, is it something which is necessary in order to enhance the Shabbat? He says, Misha gal b'koma sidlit eno mesugal alot b'raglav me'ot madrigot u'bivrat zkenim nashim alot yeladim b'chol. Somebody lives on very, very, very high buildings, very high floors. You're talking about old people. You're talking about pregnant women, children who wouldn't be able to. Otherwise, they'd be trapped in the house. I heard recently there was a question that came up. There's a certain holiday program in Panama, which a certain Jewish community went for this, are going for this holiday program in Panama. And all the apartments are from the 17th floor and up, right? Was the question over there? There is no Shabbat elevator. There, the question was: is one allowed to ask a non-Jew to come and arrange for them to take them up to the 17th floor, right? If anybody's thinking of going to Panama, I can discuss it with me privately. But that is one point. But secondly, as well, he says, in terms of the public nature of this. Maalit is something which is in the house. This may or may not be related to the fact we spoke about tchumin. We know the Torah has a concept of tchumin, but how far out you can go as well. There's never going to be a chashash of that in the maalit you're going to leave the tchum Shabbat. Tchum Shabbat in your maalit you have bigger problems. But
you can go up. You can go up.
You can go up. You can go down. You can come back up. But anyway, but more than that. He says, there's something very public, you have cars out on the streets, it's something which really is going to affect the character of Shabbat. This is not something which is necessary. Interesting, he mentions here as well the kal no'it, right? Kal no'it, which literally means easy to move. This is a sort of golf cart. So the electric, right, which has been developed by Machon Someh, And it works in such a way, I don't know exactly the technical details, but I believe it works in such a way that there's always an electric current going on. So you're not, by using it, you're not creating a it's only for people who have mobility issues, etc., would not be able to walk without it. Even that, the Kal Moed, is very, very controversial. There are a number of poskim who are against it. Rav Ariel, he explains in his Ma'amar the position of those who are against it. He himself accepts it, but it has certain limitations and has certain. It is something which, in the way that it's been constructed and the way that it appears, is not something which would affect the character of Shabbat in the same way as something like a car. Okay. Over the page 3, here we have a source from Rav Yuval Sherman. And I brought the source as well because he's somebody who, if you look at the kind of the spectrum of the religious Zionist world, I would say Rav Ariel is somebody who's probably on the more, what we'd call conservative, but the small C, Shamrani end of the scale. Rav Sherman is probably somebody who's seen to be on the more liberal end of the scale. But they agree completely on this. And he says Rav Sherman in source number 9, he says, "Vashanim rabot ani tohen le'or divrei Ramban ki uvdin v'chol lo gzerat tzadit ki im chelek mehagdalat haShabbat atzma." The concept of uvdin v'chol, the concept of a weekday activity which is prohibited, says Rav Sherman, this is not something, not just another gzera, but this is something which is part of the definition of Shabbat itself. Mibchina zo hu chamur yoter v'asur. It's going to be we have to take it very seriously. Ulam ha'sheila mlateket. As you asked earlier, there are many things we spoke about: thermostats and fridges and lights and air conditioning units and all sorts of electronic things. And again, becoming more and more ubiquitous. There are going to be more and more of these in our homes. So where do we say that these things are permitted and they are not? We don't call them uvdin b'chol. The verse says something like an autonomous car, ben mechonit automatic, to what extent would we say, just what people are used to, therefore it's something which is going to be permitted. He says, so he says, again, doesn't use as strong language as Rabbi Ariel, but he says, I think that it's safe to say that using this car on Shabbat would be forbidden. This is very important, and this I think all would agree, that having, since again, there is no formalistic prohibition in the sense of doing actual malakot, using the car, it's going to help us very much in situations, emergency situations, where people do need to drive, right? Situations of pikuach nefesh, there is no question, but we have all sorts of borderline situations. You have, for example, doctors who are going to hospital when they're coming back, which according to many poskim would be allowed to drive, but not everybody agrees. You think about police, you think about the army, you think about these systems where it's not clear that right now what I'm doing is pikuach nefesh, but that's something where you need these modes of transportation. Then it would certainly be better to use an autonomous vehicle versus one that somebody is driving. So he says, for example, like the police need to travel for certain things which are not pikuach nefesh, and they could use these cars, etc. And he says, in this way, he suggests, the last line of source number 9, we can use the technology and we can keep the character of Shabbat, right? As you're all aware, this is not a new question. This is not something brand new which has come up with autonomous cars. This has come up with many, many, many different things in the past. We spoke a few days ago between Mincha and Mariv about the whole question about time switches, about Shaon Shabbat. The opinion of Rav Moshe Feinstein was that even using a Shaon Shabbat, he says for lights to come on and off, he says that's already something which is accepted in the tzibur that everybody's used to. That's okay. But for anything else, he says, I think it should be forbidden. I think this is a zilut of the Shabbat. This is not fitting for the character of Shabbat. This is disrespectful towards Shabbat. And he says, look in source number 10. Rav Ariel quotes the Rav Moshe in bold. He says, Pashut la'anyut la'ati. Teoseh davar shu ziluta לשבת, הוא עובר בידיים בין חיוב הכבוד, שמשמע שהוא גם כן חיוב התורה שמתפרש על ידי נביאים. What Feinstein is telling us, so understand, sometimes people say, this is the most common thing, can I leave the TV on before Shabbat in order that I can watch on Shabbat? And how many times have we heard the answer? Yes, you can technically, but it's not in the spirit of Shabbat. So you've all heard that sentence. He's saying, no, that's a mistake. Don't say that, there's not in the spirit of Shabbat is something, what you're saying, not in the spirit of Shabbat, that itself is a halachic concept. That itself is going against the chiyuv of Kavod Shabbat, which the Nevi'im gave us. And that is the ziluta. Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein said that therefore I'm not going to allow you to use the Shon Shabbat for anything except for the lights. Now, Masim b'chol yom, in every light in Shabbat, Shomer Shabbat, you have a Shon Shabbat for your plata, for this, for that, for all sorts of things. So we see in a sense that his understanding, his tzara was not accepted, but I think that the principle here was accepted. And it was listen now, Rav Ariel phrases it. It's very interesting. Again, in bold, the last two lines. He tells us that we do not, in terms of not using the Shon Shabbat, that was not kept. He says, Ach Moshe emet v'torato emet. And here, referring not to Moshe Rabbeinu, but to Moshe Feinstein. He says, Moshe emet v'torato emet, kol od medubar b'machshirim beitiyim shketim, kvod HaShabbat adayin nishmar. You see, this is the way that it's been accepted in Am Yisrael, that quiet home appliances and equipment as such, that's what we use for the Shon Shabbat. That does not affect Kavod Shabbat in this way. Ulam lo ya'aleh hadat להפעיל מפעל תעשייה בצורה אוטונומית על ידי שעון שבת, זו זילות חמורה ביותר. Says nobody would think that you can now operate a whole factory automatic way on a Shon Shabbat. Sort of Moshe Feinstein was talking about. In that sense, he was accepted. So again, the question is, where do we draw the line? Where do we draw the border? Where do we say there are certain things? And these questions are more than we can even imagine. Every single home, every smart home, Internet of Things, all the automation. At what point do we say these things which work automatically are enhancing Shabbat? This fits in with the Kavod Shabbat. At what point do we say these are technologies which are going against the Tzivyon of Shabbat and these are causing zilut of the Shabbat? How do we know? I don't think there is a black and white answer to this. I don't think there's an exact formula to this. One suggestion which was made a few years ago by Rabbi Nashiv Kno, was the rabbi of Kfar Tzion. Said he passed away a few years ago. But he writes an article and he says maybe we could draw the line as follows. He says, "Nirah li shenachon lechalek bin shimushim ha'asuyim la'akel al ha'adam et hitna'aluto b'Shabbat b'mekom shvitato." He says perhaps, and again he's writing this long before we're talking about 8 years ago, but the amount of this technology has changed. But he says things which are again enhancing the Shabbat b'mekom shvitato. In the place where a person's at home, or if a person goes to a hotel, you're in the hotel for Shabbat, that is your makom shvita. We spoke about swarming before. There's a concept in the Torah itself that a person should stay in his place on Shabbat. And those things which are going to enhance that, which are going to fit in with the character of Shabbat, perhaps yes. לבין שימושים שמטרתם להמשיך את עבודתו ופעילותו היומיומית גם בשבת, as opposed to those things which are going to carry on a person's ordinary weekday, day-to-day activity, obviously without doing any melacha, right? Without that, it's not even a question. But that's where he says he would draw the line. So he says, the first area, what we said, perhaps there will be things there which we can be lenient about, which we can allow, that will still be Shabbat. But if we want the Shabbat to continue as a day of physical and spiritual rest, a day in which we are focused on Avodat Hashem as individuals, as families, as communities, we have to disconnect. This is part of what Shabbat is about, disconnect from the regular weekday activity. I remember a few years ago, there was an app that was developed. It was actually, in the end, it turned out to be a hoax. It wasn't real, but it was. They called it the Shabbos app, and there was an advert going around. People may have seen it, and they said it was worked on some sort of grammar mechanism, whatever it was. With an app you can download and makes your phone kosher for Shabbat, and you had haskamot from rabbis supposedly when none of the haskamot actually came out. I think some people realized it was a hoax. But they had things you can invite your friends over, Sudash Shit, whatever, and there was this whole thing. And we think about it. How would we imagine? How would we conceive of Shabbat? So many of us are unable to disconnect from the phones for more than 5 minutes on a weekday. Is that really something that, even if it were possible, is that something we'd want to bring into Shabbat? Is that something that we want to incorporate? And I think that essentially is the argument here against using these cars as well. You can see in source number 12, Rabbi Ariel, just in the last paragraph. He says, at the end of the day, we need to look at this not in terms of this one particular action, but we need to look at it in terms of a holistic and broader picture. And he says, "Malachot asurot b'Shabbat, anan rak osef halachot shenitan nityaches lekol echad min bofen nifrad." Don't look at each individual malacha, and each individual action is one thing. Hein yotzot b'yachad michlol shel kedusha. Rather, look at everything together. Look at the broader picture, as the Rambam says, and that is going to tell us what Shabbat is, what the Avirah of Shabbat is, and how it looks. So again, there are many, in summary, there are many of these questions that are coming up. It's not so simple, and there will be disagreements about certain things. I think it's safe to say that regarding, at least now, regarding the concept of a self-driving car, either way, it's doing everything. The consensus of the poskim today is that would be asur, that would not be fitting, that would not be appropriate with the character of Shabbat. Of course, there are benefits and advantages for medical personnel, security personnel, etc. People who would need to go into a car anyway. Rather do it in a way that you can decrease the malacha. Why not? But definitely, there's going to be more to come, and there's going to be more discussions to be had and more questions to be raised. So watch the space. Thank you. Yeah.
Ruth was first put together.
London.
It's very
Yes.
so they came out said and review day after Christmas. Exactly right. Because people play football in the street and tennis and croquet, and they'll go out and club around. But these things move and depends which marketplace you're in.